A fatal attempt at robbery this morning leaves one man and at least two others injured. It happened in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn on the 1900 block of Church Avenue. 9:40 this morning, 3 guards tried to deliver money to Lefka's check-cashing establishment. We're told one innocent bystander was shot and killed at the scene, a 55-year-old male.
When it comes to TV and film, the 90s saw non-stop depictions of heists gone wrong in the city. Shows like Law & Order and New York Undercover, among others, took some of what was in the headlines and brought it straight to our TV screens. But while those depictions do a good job of showing just how unpredictable and violent the city was at the time, they rarely delve into how situations similar to these leave communities and families shattered and with an overwhelming sense of fear hovering over them. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is Bystander, the story of the Church Avenue heist. The neighborhood of Flatbush in Brooklyn is home to over 100,000 people. Back in the 90s, the crime rate was much higher than it is today. Between 1990 and 2018, there's been an almost 90% drop in criminal activity across the board. Back in the day, it was a whole different story. The area draws many who travel into and out of the neighborhood for work and school, a neighborhood bustling with activity. Among those who'd often find themselves traveling to different parts of the 5 boroughs was a man named Robert Singleton of the Hammels houses, located on Rockaway Beach Boulevard. Robert resided here with his wife and 2 daughters, a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old. By 1993, he had been an iron worker for the Transit Authority for more than 9 years, carrying out jobs all across the 5 boroughs when needed. It was stated that he was the type of man who was always well-mannered and kept to himself, always considered a hard worker, the type of person to be in at work early and be among the last people on his way home late at night. He was described as kind-hearted and by all accounts, a good man. His family meant the world to him. He was a doting father to his girls and a supportive, loving husband to his wife. If he had the day off, he had no problem encouraging his wife to go spend time with her friends or take the day for herself while he handled things at home. Neighbors often saw him in the area with the family and leaving for work in the mornings. He could always be seen saying goodbye to his girls as they wished him a good day at work. Neighbors were called a quiet, decent man who never had any issues with anyone, always in good spirits, and more than happy to come back home to those that he loved. If he wasn't home with his loved ones or earning a living, he was out with his friends, maybe doing some bowling, and he was pretty good at it, said to have an average of about 182. It was just something he enjoyed doing when he had the spare time, normally on Saturdays. He did this often as a way to unwind. Being an iron worker for the transit system, Robert's job involved working on rail cars and tracks at different subway stations across the city. As we know, the transit system is a constant work in progress, and a lot goes into maintaining the system so that it's always reliable, essential to getting millions of commuters to and from their destinations. It's a job that requires lots of energy and teamwork, something Robert had no problems with. He was described by co-workers as someone who always looked out for others on the job, a gentleman who took great pride in his work. The work was physically demanding, but he put his all into it, always giving his best to be able to support his family. On the morning of Friday, April 16th of 1993, Robert would leave his apartment at the Hammels houses so he could be on his way to his job, His daughter wished him a good day at work and told her that she loved him. He said he loved her back and was on his way. But the morning would take a horrifying turn just a few hours later in Brooklyn, New York. On that morning, Robert and 4 of his co-workers were on their way to the Avenue I station on McDonald Avenue, since the station there needed work done on an L-beam, a job that they had handled plenty of times before. Before heading that way, they stopped at 1908 Church Avenue. It was a check cashing spot by the name of Lefta Check Cashing. These days, the location serves the same purpose as a pay-o-matic. He and his co-workers went there early to cash their checks before making their way to the job, about a 10-minute drive away. It was a busy morning in the area, as usual. The mom-and-pop businesses just starting to open up and the day just beginning. But the mood on Church Avenue would soon change. After cashing his check, Robert stopped over at a spot called Jimmy's Luncheonette so he could pick up a couple of cups of coffee for his co-workers. He placed his order, grabbed the 2 coffees, and started walking toward their transit maintenance truck parked up the block. But as he made his way there was something else unfolding at the exact same time. An armored truck from Coin Devices Corporation was parked in front of Lefta's check cashing, about to make a delivery of $101,000. Inside the truck were 3 guards. One of them was to remain behind the wheel. A second guard would check Lefta's and the surrounding area to make sure it was safe. And the third guard would be the one bringing the money inside. But before this could ever be done, a man stepped out of the laundromat right next door, and he was armed. Without warning, the man would begin shooting at the armed guards holding the money, and within seconds, 4 other unknown men across the street were also shooting in a brazen attempt to rob the truck. 5 men in total knew exactly when and where this truck was going to be, and they had just one goal in mind: to get their hands on every dollar. But there was no demand for cash, just bullets flying. From one moment to the next, it was instant chaos. Pedestrians screamed in fear, ducking into stores, taking cover wherever they could, and falling over one another, desperately seeking safety, as the gunmen exchanged fire with the guards. By this point, both sides were shooting back and forth, the bullets destroying anything they made contact with. They pierced nearby vehicles and shattered the windows to the nearby church and the storefronts on the block. A busy street, filled with everyday people like you and I, momentarily transformed into what felt like a war zone. It's one thing to hear the shots from blocks away, but the fear of knowing your life could end at any moment with a bullet that wasn't meant for you, it was something else entirely. A cab driver on the scene was caught in the crossfire, shot in the back while he tried to take cover. One of the 5 robbers was also shot in the back. He was then dragged into a white Nissan Maxima before they fled the scene. It all unfolded in just a matter of minutes. It happened so fast, but at the same time, felt like it took forever to end. More than 25 shots were fired between the guards and robbers, and one of those bullets would claim the life of 38-year-old Robert Singleton. By complete chance, as he walked toward that maintenance truck, just about to get in, that's when this unknown man just started to shoot in his direction, and one of those bullets would end up striking him in his head, entering through the right side of his temple and exiting through the left. He collapsed right in front of the church, left in a pool of his own blood until the chaos died down. His life ended instantly. When all was said and done, more than 25 shots were fired, and an innocent man's life was carelessly taken, and they didn't even get away with the money. Once the shootout started, the guard holding the bags of cash threw them into the truck and started firing back. They had no chance to get their hands on it. All they accomplished during this attempt was claiming an innocent man's life. Many saw what happened, but it was so fast that no witnesses could really describe who these men were or if any of them looked familiar. The police had very little to go on, but with time, the pieces would start to come together. As word made its way around, business owners were terrified that they might be next. Leftas had been robbed in the past, but it was a different level, almost like something out of a movie. Hundreds gathered on the street behind yellow tape, trying to get a glimpse of what took place. The block filled with squad cars and crawling with authorities who tried to gather any evidence that could point them in the right direction. Most of what was destroyed in the mayhem could easily be replaced, but not a human life, not Robert. The news would eventually make its way to his family, who were obviously distraught. It was stated that when Robert's wife heard of what happened, Her agonizing screams and cries could be heard throughout the building. While his 9-month-old daughter was too young to know what was going on, and while his 4-year-old was at daycare as everything unfolded, Robert's wife faced a heartbreaking task of delivering the news to their children, letting them know that Daddy wouldn't be coming back home. He was gone. It was an overwhelming pain that the family was trying their best to cope with, and the road to recovery would be grueling. Within hours of chaos, the area was now packed with news trucks and reporters, all looking to deliver news of the tragedy. And pretty soon, the entire tri-state area would learn of what took place.
Good afternoon, I'm Victoria Corderi. An armored car heist gone bad, and an innocent man is now dead after a wild shootout in Brooklyn. Lucy Yang is on the scene, and she joins us live now with more information on this breaking story. Lucy.
Victoria, a fatal attempt at robbery this morning leaves one man dead, at least 2 others injured. It happened in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn on the 1900 block of Church Avenue. 9:40 this morning, three guards from an armored truck tried to deliver money to Lefka's check cashing establishment. As they were trying to drop off the money, they were held up by 6 armed men. Shots rang out. Here are the details from police.
Yes. Okay, at about 9:40 this morning, CDC security system came to 1908 Church Avenue, check cashing place, deliver $101,000. At that time, one of the drivers or one of the guards alighted from the vehicle to make sure the scene was safe. When he thought it was safe, he signaled to the second guard in the truck who alighted with $101,000. As he started to walk toward the check cashing place, there was a male black who was in 1906 Church Avenue, a laundromat, who opened fire on the 2 guards.
Police tell us there were 5 other suspects waiting across the street. They then joined in on the gunfire, so there were 6 suspects altogether. Shots rang out between the guards and the suspects. Police believe the suspects may have been using 9mm semi-automatic weapons. We're told one innocent bystander was shot and killed at the scene, a 55-year-old male city transit worker who was on duty and trying to cash a check at the time. A livery driver was also shot. He was treated and released at the scene. We're told one of the suspects may have also been shot. Police believe he was dragged into the getaway car by the other suspects, which then sped away north on St. Paul's Place. None of the money was taken, but a life was lost in today's brazen holdup here in Brooklyn. We're live in Flatbush. I'm Lucy Yang.
After Robert's life was taken, there would be little information released on who might have been responsible. While they weren't making the information public, authorities had an idea of who they were looking for. On September 9th of 1993, months later, an article in a local paper, the Canarsie Courier, would publish an article stating that the police at the 69th Precinct were searching for suspects in an unrelated crime. It involved teen girls that had been tied up, beaten with weapons, and violated. That article would publish a name belonging to one of the suspects, 20-year-old Richard Babyface Jameswhite. Once that article was released, more would follow, and through tips and investigations, his name would come up more and more. It was on September 22nd of 1993 when the Daily News would publish an article formally naming Jameswhite as a key player 5 months prior. Police had their eyes on Jameswhite for quite some time, but every time they tried to catch up to him, he was always steps ahead, able to slip away before being captured. On September 13th of 1993, the cops got close, but the attempted arrest would result in a shootout between Jameswhite and the authorities. He avoided arrest by driving off in a vehicle at 80 miles per hour, even keeping up the speed as the car lost one of its wheels in the chaos. He escaped by driving on just a wheel's rim. He was described as a small person who looked far too young to do so much harm, but this was far from the truth. It was stated that when Jameswhite's brother was murdered in 1991, it changed him. After that, it was like he had a bloodlust and bent on seeking revenge. He was arrested for a February 19, 1991 shooting that was said to be retaliation for his brother's slaying, but he was released on $5,000 bail. And after that, he skipped out on his court date and just eluded the police, leaving him free and open to carry out the heist in 1993 that would claim Robert's life. He would be tied to numerous crimes, including slayings, violating young girls, and other robberies, but even with everything they knew, it was almost impossible to catch him. Other crimes included a time that he performed a drive-by on a bicycle. Obviously, Jameswhite was considered very dangerous, very unpredictable, and pretty much capable of anything. In other words, a ticking time bomb. But authorities were still no closer to catching him. Frustrations mounted, and authorities would find themselves in collaborative efforts with other agencies, everywhere from Rochester to Boston to Philly to Baltimore to Toronto and Washington, D.C. For years, word would start to make its way around about Jameswhite believing that he was pretty much invincible and invisible, in the sense that he believed he couldn't be detected by the cops. This was said to be because of a trip that he had taken to Jamaica, where he apparently visited a voodoo doctor and received a special blessing. He was said to walk around with a clove of garlic around his neck for, quote, voodoo protection. There were also mentions of him sending his clothes to Jamaica so they could be, quote, exorcised and make him invisible. It was like he had become this larger-than-life figure around the neighborhood and the city who was just far too smart for authorities. While many read the papers and were fearful of possibly coming across the young killer, others respected the things he did in a strange way. While he was said to be small and look young, his reputation was the exact opposite. It seemed that a trail of blood was left wherever he stepped foot. And on April 29th of 1994, more than a year after the heist, the trail would come to an end in Atlanta, Georgia. Police were tipped off to a dispute that took place in a parking lot in DeKalb County. It all unfolded when Jameswhite and a man named Devin Brown were pulling out of the parking lot of a restaurant called the Island Cafe, located on Memorial Drive. They scratched the front fender of another car belonging to a man named Anthony Macklin, who was riding with his girlfriend. This would lead to a confrontation between the men. Words were exchanged and the argument escalated, resulting in a weapon being brandished and several shots fired that would strike Macklin in the torso. He would succumb to his fatal wounds later. After that, Jameswhite and Brown fled in their car, abandoning it a few miles down the road before exiting and attempting to flee on foot. But this time, Jameswhite wouldn't get away. He gave himself up to authorities shortly after and was immediately arrested. He was questioned about his past crimes and the trail of bloodshed that he had left behind. He was also confronted with evidence of a raid that authorities had conducted at his apartment in 1993 after that heist. When they searched, they would find several semi-automatic handguns, one of them directly tied to the slaying of Robert Singleton. This time around, there would be no bail, and he would have to answer to his crimes. By the time he was captured, Jameswhite would be wanted in 15 different murders that the authorities knew of across 4 states. By December 5th of 1994, jury selection was underway in the trial for Richard Jameswhite and Devin Brown. Anthony Macklin's girlfriend would testify that she saw what took place. The men offered Macklin $100 to not call the cops, but when his girlfriend went to the payphone to call the insurance company, Jameswhite grabbed Macklin out of nowhere and Brown began to fire, hitting him in the torso. After Macklin fell down to the ground, Jameswhite took the weapon, stood over him, and fired once more before running to their vehicle. The jury would hear more details on the trail of death left by Jameswhite and his accomplice. They were both sentenced to life in prison after being found guilty of malice murder, finally putting an end to a killing spree that started hundreds and hundreds of miles away on the streets of New York and felt like it just never seemed to end. While the person responsible for the heinous crimes was found and arrested, many felt that there were a lot of crimes he didn't answer to. Residents of Flatbush couldn't help but ask themselves if it was just a matter of time before something like this happened again. On top of leaving a family torn, it left business owners and residents with an overwhelming sense of fear. Given the severity of the incident and others similar to it all across the city, it would raise major concerns about the amount of police presence in the area, resulting in a demand for more patrols, something we still hear a lot about today as the crime rate fluctuates in the 5 boroughs. Of course, it's always good to be protected, but for many who had found themselves in the middle of the crossfire, not only in this situation, but others, it was far too late. No amount of police presence could ever get rid of that trauma or could ever undo the damage that was already done. What took place on church morning showed that you could be doing everything right in life and be the best person with the best intentions, and in the blink of an eye, you can find yourself in the middle of something horrible and it can be completely out of your control. When you're among people who might be blinded by rage or have no regard for human life, it can be any innocent person who pays the ultimate price. One person's actions can change everything in the worst way. When Robert's life was taken just 4 months into 1993, he would become the 85th bystander caught in a crossfire that year. To his family and friends, he was more than a number and always will be. They lost someone near and dear to them, someone who would likely still be here today, if not for someone else's violent and selfish tendencies. He deserved much better than his life coming to an abrupt end, and so did his family. A co-worker and friend of Robert's was quoted as saying the following: "This death really hits me hard, real hard. This happened so suddenly. I said hello to him, and an hour and a half later, he was gone." It was a statement that told a whole story in just a few words, a reminder of just how fragile life can be. Robert left behind family and friends that loved him, co-workers who cared about him and admired his work ethic. He'll always be remembered as the hardworking, doting father that he was, a true example of a good person who just wanted the best for his family and worked hard for it, but found himself in the middle of someone else's rage, someone else's greed. An innocent bystander, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, who paid with his life. If alive today, Robert would be 70 years old. Rest in peace, Robert Singleton, and my deepest condolences go out to his family and loved ones. You aren't forgotten.